We are officially halfway through the week of the PFT Live post-Super Bowl hiatus. We return on Monday with a new show before we head to Indianapolis for 4 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday from the Scouting Combine. Until then, it's PFT PM, 3 for 3. Hoping to go 5 for 5 this week. I will admit, though, it is a little slow this week. This is the dead week before everything really gets going with the combine, free agency, the build up to the draft, the offseason workouts, and it kind of carries through until June. But this is that one spot. This is why we don't have PFT Live this week. This is the one spot, the post-Super Bowl rut, the pre-free agency blues. But there's still plenty to discuss. And one of the topics of the moment, thanks mainly to the NBA, is tanking. Commissioner Adam Silver addressed it over the weekend. We've talked about it on PFT Live. I've talked about it here. And the whole idea, and as Silver acknowledged, a system that rewards bad teams creates misaligned incentives, because once the teams realize they're bad and they're not going to make it to the playoffs, or that they're not going to make a serious playoff run, let's go ahead and be as bad as we can be to enhance our chances of getting one of the best players coming in. And apparently there's 3 high-end prospects that teams are clamoring for, and it resulted in fines last week, $500,000 for the Jazz, $100,000 for the Indiana Pacers. So here we are. And that led to an interesting observation from Mark Cuban, who previously was the majority owner of the Dallas Mavericks, now still holds a piece of the team, but he doesn't call the shots anymore. He posted something on Twitter that I think justifies careful consideration and reaction. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him. My point is that his views can create issues for the NBA. The argument, why the NBA should embrace tanking. The NBA has been misguided in thinking that fans want to see their teams compete every night with a chance to win. It's never been that way. When I got into the NBA, they thought they were in the basketball business. They aren't. They're in the business of creating experiences for fans. Few can remember the score from the last game they saw or went to. They can't remember the dunks or shots. What they remember is who they were with, the family, friends, a date. That's what makes the experience special. Fans know their team can't win every game. They know only one team can win a ring. What that fan cares about, their team's record. What fan that, it's either me or it's him. What fan that care about their team's record want is hope. I don't think that's English. Hope it will get better and have a chance to compete for the playoffs and then maybe a ring. And one way to get closer to that is by the draft and trades and cap room. You have a better chance of improving via all 3 when you tank. We didn't tank often, Cuban said, as to the Mavericks, only a few times over 23 years. But when we did, our fans appreciated it. And it got us to where we could improve, trade up to get Luka, and improve our team. The NBA should worry more about fan experience than tanking. It should worry more about pricing fans out of games than tanking. You know who cares the least about tanking? A parent who can't afford to bring their 3 kids to a game and buy their kids a jersey of their favorite player. Tanking isn't the issue. Affordability and quality of game presentation are. End of tweet. Interesting perspective, but this is where you blur the line between competition and experience. You know, when you go to a movie, when you go to a concert, unless the artist walks off after 15 minutes because of inebriation or vocal malfunction or just getting booed off the stage. I mean, when you spend your money to go to anything other than a sporting event, you're pretty much guaranteed to get your money's worth because you're not going to be disappointed by the outcome. The home team isn't going to potentially lose. When you are an ardent fan of a sports team, that's part of the risk you take. Folks who flew across the country from Boston to San Francisco knew damn well that that money they were spending was basically a bet that they were going to have a good time. Because at the end of the day, and they could say, well, we had a few great meals and it was a great experience. We really liked the wind, but they lost the game. How are you happy about that? Now, that's the ultimate example of the consequence of spending the money and going to a game and losing. What Cuban's saying is the people who go to the run-of-the-mill regular season games really don't care if the home team wins or the team that they show up to root for as a fan of the visiting team wins. I don't know that I buy that. Isn't the experience enhanced by getting the outcome that you wanted? Don't you want to go to a game to see one of the two teams win? There aren't many neutral observers. Haven't seen Rob Lowe at an NBA game wearing a hat with the Jerry West logo on it. You have a rooting interest, or, and this is where it becomes problematic, a wagering interest. This is why tanking is a problem. You can't separate the concept of experience, and some teams, fans may want the team to tank in order to be better in the future. You can't separate that from the fact that the major sports leagues are cramming their pockets with gambling money. And I don't know how it works in the NBA as it relates to the owners of the teams there. But in the NFL, the owners can own up to 5% of any company that operates a sports book. So the owners can be the house, and they won't tell us who owns what. So when you jump into bed and start rolling around with gambling, you can't say, well, we really don't care who wins the games. Why should we care? Why should we care if one team doesn't really want to win? Why would anybody be concerned about that? The obvious reason is you've got people who are betting on the outcomes of these games, and the sports leagues, specifically the NBA, are profiting from that industry. So you can't allow the integrity of the game to be undermined by other concerns. You need to have, in every game, a basic understanding that both teams are doing their best to win. This isn't the Harlem Globetrotters, where, you know, if you show up rooting for the Washington Generals, you're going to be upset 99% of the time. For that, it's entertainment. It doesn't matter who wins, although the Harlem Globetrotters rarely lose. Rarely do you see kids file out of a Harlem Globetrotters game happy that the Globetrotters lost. They all go to root for the Globetrotters to win. But that's the closest thing to basketball as pure entertainment and experience. You can't make the NBA into the Globetrotters. You can't make it all about the light show and the introductions and how good the food was and how fun it was to sit courtside. At the core, it's competition. And because the NBA and any of the sports leagues could have done this, they act like, well, you know, once gambling was legalized, we had to get involved. No, you don't have to get involved. You can hate it as much as you pretended to hate it when it was illegal. You don't have to all of a sudden get into business with the sports books until you realize how much money you can make. But you can't reconcile shrugging at tanking with maximizing the revenue stream that comes from gambling. There is no tanking exception to gambling, whether it's the money line, whether it's the spread, whether it's the over-under. If one team is putting lesser players on the floor deliberately and consciously in an effort to not win games so that they can position themselves to better get a prime player in the upcoming draft, that conflicts with this new embrace of gambling, period. That's why the NBA needs to care about tanking. That's why the NFL needs to care about tanking. And those are just some of the ingredients for the reckoning that is coming. And it's coming. You can feel it in the air. It's coming. It may be a year. It may be a decade. It may be longer than that. But it's not sustainable. There is too much money being made from gambling by the sports books and directly or indirectly by the leagues and the teams to have any environment where it's accepted that one team isn't doing its best to win. That's unacceptable. And now we're going to try to both sides this thing. And I got a lot of respect for Mark Cuban. I'm surprised that he's the one putting this out there. Don't turn this into a both sides issue unless you're going to completely divest from any and all influence of gambling. That's the only way. And then you just tell the world tanking's fine. And you say to anyone out there who may wager their hard-earned money on basketball games. Do so at your own risk, because there's a chance that team that you bet on to win or to cover, or you bet the over-under for total points scored in a game, there's a chance one team isn't really trying to win tonight because they're thinking about the future and they're tanking, and we're fine with it. In the NFL, again, it's yet to get to that point. One of the reasons is there's only 17 games in the regular season. There aren't many obvious instances where a team week by week is tanking, but it has happened and it will happen. And the NFL will do everything it can to not create a situation where people notice it. They ignore it. They maintain a clear wall between being bad in the regular season and being in great position when the run-up to the draft begins. And part of this is because the draft has become this thing, this force, this massive off-season event that draws hundreds of thousands of people to the location of the draft and generates rating points. Although the rating on the first Thursday night of the draft, I mean, it's not even close to what a regular season Thursday night game is. But at a time when the NFL otherwise has no mechanism to generate revenue, it is a moneymaker. When you can make money when you're not playing games, you know you're successful. So the draft is so important to the NFL now that they want to continue to get people to never even consider that teams may be tanking, but they do. They do it in obvious ways. They do it in non-obvious ways. But to argue that it's okay ignores the fact that because of legalized gambling and the money the teams and the leagues make from legalized gambling, it's not okay to embrace it. It's not okay to make it okay. And one of these days, it's going to be a massive problem. And it's probably going to be a massive problem for the NBA before it is for the NFL. And the question is, will the NFL learn vicariously the lessons that other sports are learning? And the NFL is still very fortunate. It's yet to have a major gambling scandal. The NBA's had a couple. Baseball's dealing with one with the Cleveland Guardians pitchers. The NFL has managed to stay low, and maybe it's because the NFL has done a good job of keeping the scandals from becoming scandals, getting ahead of it, making sure it doesn't become a thing. Regardless, it's something to worry about, and it's nothing to take lightly. Tanking can lead to major problems unless and until the sports leagues say, we don't want your gambling money, and there's too much money at stake for the league to turn their backs now. Speaking of tanking, one way to tank without tanking is to, as the Dolphins may do, and I don't know what they're going to do with Tua Tagovailoa. I doubt that he's going to be the starting quarterback in 2026. He's probably not going to be on the roster in 2026. When they say they're in the process of making a decision, I think the decision relates more to how do we separate? Can we trade him? Is there a way that we can pay a lot of the money and somebody takes him? Do we attach a draft pick to him the way the Texans did with Brock Osweiler 9 years ago? We've talked about that recently. But I caught wind yesterday of the possibility. And it surprised me when I heard it, but then I started talking to other people about it. It's like, maybe they'll do this. They owe Tua Tagovailoa $54 million this year, fully guaranteed. If they cut him, they have to deal with $99.2 million in dead cap charges. The thinking was they would cut him after the league year begins on March 11 with a post-June 1 designation, which would then spread the dead money between 2026 and 2027. $55.2 million this year, $43.8 million next year. That's their prerogative. That's a device that was put into the CBA in 2006 to make it easier for teams to move on from veteran players early enough for the veteran players to then go have a market elsewhere. Because remember, there was a time, and it's now been 20 years ago, from 1994 until 2006, post-June 1 free agency was a thing. It was a big spot on the calendar because there were teams that had veterans and they couldn't divide the cap charge over multiple years until after June 1. And there'd be another wave of free agency when those veterans got cut. That's gone now for the most part because every team each year can cut two guys with that designation. But they don't have to. And there's talk that the Dolphins will indeed take the full $99.2 million dead money charge for Tua Tagovailoa this year. And that's kind of tanking in a weird sort of a way. It's nearly 1/3 of your entire cap space for the year. It's going to be anywhere from 301 to 305, something like that. If you're going to have $99 million tied to a guy who's not even on the team, how the hell are you going to have a team? You got $200 million left for everyone else. And I know every team has varying amounts of dead cap money every year. And we've got to the point where we don't even think twice. $40 million in dead money for a player. Oh, well, they'll figure out a way to deal with it. The Broncos, they took the Russell Wilson cap charge, split it up into 2 years, and they went to the playoffs both seasons. But hard to get excited about the Dolphins season for 2026 if you're a Dolphins fan, if they ultimately do take a $99.2 million cap charge. And it's going to be a PR challenge to get the fans to understand why it makes sense to do it now, because generally speaking, it makes sense to delay cap charges into future years because the cap always goes up. So that $1 million in dead money this year, it means a little less. It hurts a little less next year because the cap is higher. It's a smaller percentage of your total spending allotment. But we'll see. We'll find out. You know, they may make an announcement next week. The scouting combine, John Eric Sullivan, the new GM, Jeff Hafley, the new head coach, when they are at the podium, if they do the media tour, and we hope they do. We're trying to line people up now. Next Tuesday is when the coaches and GMs, for the most part, are in that space where the podiums are and where the various TV sets are located. But they're going to be asked about it. My guess is they'll announce it then, or they'll leak it / announce it on Monday, or maybe on Friday. Maybe it classifies as a Friday afternoon bad news dump. I don't know. But just keep an eye on the possibility. Don't be stunned. I'm not saying they will. It's plausible that they will. And there are folks out there who believe they might. And that at a minimum, it's one of the options. What are our options for Tua Tagovailoa? Well, one of them is split the cap charge over 2 years. One is just take it all and be done with it. And that's the other side of this. If they take it all now, he counts for 0 in 2027. But if they do take it all now, you know, there's chatter about Malik Willis being a target of the Dolphins. Jeff Hafley comes from Green Bay, where Malik Willis has been the last 2 years. John Eric Sullivan comes from Green Bay. He was part of the front office that stole him for a 7th-round pick. Kind of hard to pay Malik Willis if you're taking $99.2 million for Tua. But if you take it all this year, we've seen how low the cap charge can be in the first year of a long-term deal. It could be, and I'd have to do the math, but you know, if you pay him signing bonus and minimum salary, the cap charge for this year is the minimum salary plus 20% of the signing bonus. So you could do something manageable, and then you kick the money into future years. So it's not impossible, but it complicates the situation if you take the $99 million all at once. We'll see what they do. Now, some teams impose their own impediments to having a successful year, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. Sometimes the league imposes those impediments. And in the case of the 49ers, they've kind of asked for part of it because now, this year, they've announced they're going to be playing in Mexico City. In addition to the game, they're going to be playing in Melbourne. Week 1 in Melbourne. Mexico City, apparently it's going to be later in the year, week 13 or week 14. It adds up to a total travel obligation of 38,000 miles, with a caveat I'll explain in a second. And the easy reaction is, hey, they're just trying to get away from the electrical substation. Take us as far from that thing as we can. Go. But how is it not a factor? They're going to play in 3 different countries, and they're going to be the first team to play multiple international games that aren't in consecutive weeks. Last year, the Vikings did Ireland and London in back-to-back weeks, which was a lot easier than, you know, going to Ireland and back to Minnesota and then going to England later in the year. That is far less of a burden, although, yeah, you're away for over a week, all told, from home. It's less of a travel burden when you're only going across the Atlantic Ocean one time back and forth. 49ers are going to be going to Australia, and then they come back, and they've got 2 trips to the East Coast. They have a game at Atlanta. They have a game at the New York Giants. My guess right now is when the schedule comes out in early May, they'll have those games in back-to-back weeks, because we've seen that before. They'll go to the Greenbrier, they'll go somewhere else, they'll stay for the week in between the games. But it's just going to be a different kind of year for the San Francisco 49ers. What kind of an impact will it be in a very competitive division where they're dealing with the Rams, they're dealing with the Seahawks? And the margins can be very, very tight. It came all the way down to the final game of the regular season between the 49ers and the Seahawks for the 1 seed and the division title last year. It doesn't take much. One game here, one game there to change everything. It's going to be a challenge for the 49ers. They have a team that still can compete at a very, very high level, and they're going to be carrying a slightly heavier bag than everyone else, regardless of what happens with injuries or anything else. And the injuries can be the great equalizer or the great unequalizer, and we've seen the 49ers deal with a lot of injuries the past 2 seasons. They overcame them as best they could in 25. In 24, they didn't. Even if they stay completely healthy in 2026, that wear and tear, that stress, that just time stuck in an airplane and different schedules and lack of true consistency and continuity, that can be a factor. It's going to be a challenge for the coaching staff to make everything as normal as possible in a year that will be abnormal from a scheduling standpoint. Speaking of abnormal, this is something that came up during Super Bowl week, and it was one of the things we didn't have a chance to really look at closely. But it's just another example of why the Jets are one of the most dysfunctional teams in the National Football League. The Jets are the Jets, as maybe someone should say. Woody Johnson, the owner of the team, has been the common thread for 25, 26 years of dysfunction in New York. Yeah, they made it to the AFC Championship somehow in back-to-back seasons under Rex Ryan. They haven't been to the playoffs since 2010. And the fact that Aaron Glenn has fired so many of the coaches that he hired just a year ago, that was a sign that his buyout probably saved him $40-45 million to not coach the team, probably saved him from getting fired after 1 year. And now, beyond having to make a massive overhaul to his coaching staff, this story, and Rich Cimini of ESPN.com crystallized it recently, and we wrote about it at PFT on Wednesday. The idea that Wink Martindale had a couple of interviews with Aaron Glenn to be the next defensive coordinator of the team. At the first interview, the impression was he gets the keys to the defense. He runs his system. He does his thing. He calls the plays. Second interview, well, it's not going to be that way. And the takeaway, and this echoes reporting that popped up a couple of weeks ago, the notion that Woody Johnson may have said to Aaron Glenn, hey, you're a defensive coach. You were hired because of your success with the Lions defense. You run the defense. You call the plays. I mean, you already fired Steve Wilkes during the 2025 season. This time around, you're not going to delegate. You're not going to be the CEO of the team. You're going to be the head coach, and you're going to run the defense, and you're going to call the defensive plays. And it just feels like it's not going to go well. Not that that's a risky proposition. When has things gone well for the Jets in recent years? But this one is just lining up already to be a problem. And Glenn, and look, the buyout will be around $30 million after the 2026 season. But, if you're having misgivings about the guy you hired, and this goes back to something that I learned years ago, and this is true in any business, any endeavor. If you've made a mistake, you got 2 choices. You can double down or you can admit it. Admitting it, that's the easiest path back to normal. Doubling down just complicates everything. And who knows? Maybe this is exactly what the Jets need. Maybe this will bring out the best in Aaron Glenn. Maybe he'll be the coach of the year. But the circumstances are far from ideal. The overhaul in the coaching staff, the inability to hire the guy that he may have wanted, to let that guy run the defense so Aaron Glenn can be free to coach the whole team. By all indications, he's not allowed to do it because the boss said you're not doing it. And it'll be interesting to see what the players think of the boss when the next wave of NFLPA report cards is published to the players and then inevitably leaked to someone in the media. All right. We'll stay in New York for the last thing I want to talk about today. And we've discussed it on the show a couple of different times. Michael Hawley and I last Friday spent a lot of time talking about it. I've written some things about it. And I've just done more thinking about this. The way the NFL is handling Steve Tisch, the co-owner of the Giants, who was implicated in the latest batch of Epstein files. His communications with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein had been convicted once, after he had been given the highest level possible of sex offender status, after everyone who was in a position to know or should know who and what Jeffrey Epstein was. That's when Steve Tisch was communicating, called it a brief association. The information that's been released and reported by the likes of The Athletic and the Wall Street Journal paint a picture of anything but brief. But they had this arrangement apparently where Jeffrey Epstein was trying to connect Steve Tisch with dates. And the NFL has taken a very basic, perfunctory, we have to gather the facts. We have to investigate whether we'll investigate. We'll look into it. I mean, technically that's an investigation, but it's kind of like a pre-investigation. Like, we're not investigating him yet. We're just investigating whether or not we need to investigate him. And the commissioner addressed it at the Super Bowl press conference, the Monday of Super Bowl week. I asked the league again today if there's anything to add beyond what the commissioner said, and the league said there isn't. But I want to build on what we discussed on Friday, because the story from last week from The Athletic, it added that element beyond the emails. It added the element of the woman who was interviewed by Radio France 1. And she told the story of being connected by Epstein to an American producer. And it wasn't clearly Steve Tisch, but there's enough there. There's enough of a connection potentially to justify, if not mandate, an investigation by the NFL as to whether or not this was Steve Tisch. I mean, that's the threshold question. Was this woman who was interviewed fairly recently by Radio France 1, was she referring to Steve Tisch? Because the picture it paints, as I said last week, it kind of has a Harvey Weinstein vibe to it. Film producer, somebody who wants a break, somebody who's looking for help, and, well, I'll help you in exchange. I mean, let's call it for what it is. I'll help you in exchange for sexual favors. And that in and of itself is enough reason. If the NFL is serious about the contents of the personal conduct policy, if the NFL is telling the truth when it says owners are held to a higher standard than players, that's enough to justify an aggressive investigation, the same kind of thing that a player may face in a situation like that. Not an effort to just keep quiet and let it all blow over. And that's what I feel like so many people are doing who have been connected to Epstein. The Casey Wasserman thing is just bizarre. The guy is selling his entire talent agency, but he's still going to be the chair of the LA 28 Olympic Organizing Committee. And it's all about PR and managing the PR and dealing with the things that happen. And for the NFL, there's really nothing that is forcing them to do anything, because there's no further development that is going to naturally happen unless it's driven by the media. And look, it was the media that drove the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing in the first place. Julie Brown, the Miami Herald, who had the initial reporting that started all of this. And here's how I got back to thinking more about Tisch and researching this a little bit more. She retweeted our story that kind of takes what was in The Athletic with the information that was provided in the interview that the woman gave to Radio France 1, tied it back to the Epstein communications with Steve Tisch. And maybe there's something there. Maybe this isn't something we just shrug off as the activities between consenting adults. Maybe there is an element of this trade-off, this Weinstein-style trade-off. And one of the people who responded to her retweet of our story pointed out Title VII of the Human Rights Act of 1964, and that unlocked my prior life as a lawyer, because I handled a lot of cases that fell under Title VII and or the West Virginia equivalent, the West Virginia Human Rights Act. But most states have their own version of Title VII. But the basic prohibition against sexual harassment, there's two forms: hostile work environment based on gender, and quid pro quo sexual harassment, where basically there's a bargain that's done. You give me what I want, I'll give you what you want. And you don't have to be an employee for that to kick in. And although it's civil liability almost exclusively, when you do it, it's still something that runs afoul of the laws that are on the books, from the federal government to the state of New York to New York City, because this incident allegedly happened. If Tisch was the one that the woman is referring to, it happened in New York City. And when you go back and look at the specifics, the details that she shared in the Radio France 1 interview, there was contact involved. The unidentified film producer put his hand on her thigh. Well, if she didn't want that, that's a violation. Technically, civil law, technically criminal law. It's an unwanted touching. It's a battery. So my point is, I'm not saying the guy needs to have a perp walk and he's going to be prosecuted. I don't see enough in what's out there now to think there's going to be any type of a prosecution. There could be more that would come out through further investigation. This could just be the tip of the iceberg. We don't know. My point is this: there's more than enough there for the NFL to be troubled. There's more than enough there for the NFL to do something. And it's not enough to just, in my opinion, have a press conference, word salad, word salad, word salad, and then just move on and await further evidence that you, the NFL, are in control of harvesting. Because if they're not motivated to get the evidence, they're not going to get the evidence. The only way they're going to get to the bottom of this is to investigate. Try to figure out who the person is that gave that interview, that may or may not trace back to an interaction with Steve Tisch. Talk to that person if she'll talk. It's one of the flaws in the NFL's personal conduct policy and its in-house justice system. It has no subpoena power. It can't make anyone cooperate if they don't want to, but they can try. And above all else, they can bring in Tisch. They can bring in Tisch and they can question him on the basic proposition of, is this you that's being referred to here? If the woman won't cooperate, show him the contents of the story in The Athletic, show him the potential objective facts that connect it back to him, and find out, is it you? Are they going to do that? Have they done that? Are they going to tell us what they've done? I just think some things are so important that you can't just brush it under the rug. And you can't just do your investigation and not tell anyone what you did. When you're a multi-billion-dollar business that thrives on taxpayer money for the construction and renovation of stadiums, that thrives on people showing up in the tens of thousands to pay for tickets to attend games where they buy overpriced food and beer and merch, and in the millions to tune in and watch on the public airwaves. I don't know how you can just justify doing nothing and saying nothing and just hoping that everyone moves on. And there's been so much of that with this whole Epstein thing. At every level of government and private industry, to the extent that captains of industry have been dragged into this. Let's just run out the clock. Let's just let the air come out of this balloon and we'll move on to something else. And if we've learned anything over the past several months, people are not going to let this go. And as it relates to the NFL's specific corner of this ugly universe of the Epstein files, somebody's got to keep banging the drum. And for now, I'm going to keep banging the drum. And we'll see what comes next. Will there be some reporting? And I know you're thinking, well, you can do some of the reporting. Well, I can, but I got to factor in my time, my overall obligations, my capacity to to get to the bottom. I don't know. We're going to go to New York and start sniffing around and asking people. Like, I don't have time to do the kinds of things that other media outlets are in a position to do. And I'm supporting and rooting for them to go do it. Find this stuff out, and we'll showcase it. We'll trumpet it. But somebody needs to do something. If the NFL is not going to do it, somebody needs to do something, because it just feels like there's more there. And it feels like the NFL and Tisch, and I don't know where the Giants come down on all this. I don't know how John Mara, Chris Mara, I don't know how they feel about it, but it just feels like someone should expect something more. That there's enough there that the league should be troubled. The Giants should be troubled. I get emails from Giants fans who are troubled, and they want to know more about this. They don't want it to just fall into the void and be forgotten. And it feels like, and the only reason I'm talking about it today, it feels like the NFL has constructed a scenario where this is just going to be forgotten. Because absent fresh reporting, like what we saw last week from The Athletic, absent that, the NFL is not going to be forced to do anything. Absent that, the NFL controls the whole process. They're the ones who are looking for the facts. And if they don't tell us what they're doing, we can only assume they're not looking very hard. All right, that's it for this Wednesday edition of PFT PM. We will be posting fresh content around the clock at profootballtalk.com. And I'll be back again tomorrow for a Thursday edition of PFT PM. Thanks as always for some of your time, and we'll talk to you again soon. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.